And for the bottom part of page 3, here's that little list of steps. Let's go ahead and fill this in for ourselves. This would be a great way to see how it's sinking in. How are you doing? Are you getting this memorized? If you can fill this in from memory, you are well on your way to having this process in your long-term memory and ready for the exam. So when we're trying to do the strategic split, we multiply our A value times our C value. We then list factor pairs of that product AC until we can find and use a pair that adds to equal B, and that's if C was positive, greater than 0. Or we find and use a pair that subtracts to equal our B value, and that's if C is negative. And then once we find that strategic pair, we'll go ahead and split the B term in the original problem, that middle piece, back into its original O and I, its outside and inside pieces, using that pair. And the thing we want to keep note of, put some exclamation points here, exclamation point, not explanation, exclamation, keep the signs. Order doesn't necessarily matter here, which piece you put first in the split, but the signs do, especially if you're subtracting. You got to get the sign right. But you can always check yourself along the way. Once you split it, the two would have to then be recombined back together to get you back, in this case, to -18. So there's lots of automatic checks along the way. So let's try number 60 together. We're going to be very, very boringly good. And as they're asking us to factor completely, the first thing we check for is there a GCF? And in fact, there is a GCF. These all are divisible by 2. So we pull that 2 out, leaving behind 2x squared minus 9x minus 5. If you forget, two things will happen. One, you'll have bigger numbers to deal with as you go through, which can sometimes take longer, because you end up with a AC combination that has a lot more factor pairs. And the second thing you run into is at the end, you'll need to recognize that there's still a GCF that can come out of one of those binomials, the two terms that you've created. So it's just easier if you can pull it out now. So we'll go ahead and write this down where near the end where we think our answer is, so we don't leave it out of our final form. 2 is a factor here. And then we look at what's left in our 3 terms, and we have an A value of 2, a B value of -9, and a C value of 5, and that C value is negative, which means we're going to subtract our factor pairs to try to find a combination that gives us -9. So we start with our A value times our C value, which is going to be 2 times 5, which is 10. And then we're going to split that into pairs. What multiplies to give us 10? 1 times 10, 2 times 5. And we are attempting to subtract to get -9. So the 2 and 5, there's no combination there, but the 1 and 10, if you take 1, subtract 10, you will get -9. So we're going to have a -1x minus 10x will equal your -9x. And the -1x can just be written as plain old -x. So we'll go ahead and split that into -x. I'm sorry, not negative, but positive 1x. Positive x minus 10x gives us our -9x. And then we bring down the other original pieces here. 2x squared. Notice I'd already brought down the GCF from the original. I'm just bringing down the rest of the trinomial that we're trying to factor. We've now successfully converted to 4 terms, so we look to see what the first two have in common. They have an x, leaving behind 2x plus 1. The second one, they have a -5 in common, and we're tipped off to do a negative because that first term is also negative. There's a minus in front of it. So we pull a -5. If you forget and just do the 5, what happens is, and I sound like a broken record, but eventually it'll sink in for all of us here. What happens is if you forget to pull the negative, you'll get pretty close. You'll get the 2x and the 1, but the signs will be opposite of what you need. So that's your, oh yeah, I need to pull a negative. So we divide out the -5 here, and you're left with 2x plus 1. Shouldn't be a shocker. We were expecting a match here. That's what factoring by grouping does. That's the beauty of it. And so now we are down here. Whew, it's a good thing I wrote down that GCF because it's just sitting here happily waiting for me. I would have forgotten all about it. 2x plus 1. And then what's left behind from our big GCF here is our x and our minus and our 5. Final factored form, 2 times 2x plus 1 times x minus 5. And I'm just realizing I must just be in a really happy factoring mood here because I forgot 2 things. One was to ask ourselves how many terms, and the other was to ask you to pause the video so that you could try this on your own. Well, hopefully I'll get a chance to do that plenty on the homework, or maybe you paused it before I started going through it, so that's great. At the bottom here on page 430, the author just talks you through that guess and test type method. Totally legitimate. Some people can get really good and fast at this, and then you don't have to worry too much about the strategic split. It's more of a mental exercise of trying to find that split, so to speak. But there's lots of ways to do this, so find what works for you, what's making sense. Bring those questions to class.